Okay, welcome back. So today we're going through May-June 2022 question paper 13. So first thing, we're going to mark off question 1, no longer relevant from the syllabus. And we're going to start at the bottom at question 30. Okay, so a country is suffering from severe deflation. Now remember that there's two types of deflation, but if they're telling us that it's severe deflation, then we can assume that it is also known, or aka, bad deflation, and that it means that the deflation is from aggregate demand shifting to the left. Remember, good deflation is where aggregate supply will shift to the right. We're looking for a policy which will increase our expenditure or which will help us to shift aggregate demand back to the right. So, what is most likely to prevent the deflation from worsening? Increasing income tax. So it's not going to be that, obviously, because if we increase income tax to help reduce the government's budget deficit, increasing income tax will not help us to increase expenditure. It's a contractionary fiscal policy designed to continue to move AD to the left. The same with increasing interest rates, contractionary monetary policy, again designed to have AD moving left. Increasing transfer payments to reduce income inequality, now that will work, because if we increase transfer payments to reduce inequality of income, at the same time what we're doing is we are transferring funds essentially from high income individuals to low income individuals. Those low income individuals, when they get the increased transfer payments, they're more likely to boost consumer spending and to boost consumption, which means that aggregate demand should be able to move to the right, and it will help us to stop the deflation from worsening. Now for D, revaluing the currency to bring in more revenue from exports. So remember that a revaluation of the currency generally, it will result in the price of exports going up, the total exports going down, price of imports going down, and total imports going up. So it won't actually allow us to bring in more revenue from exports. It will generally allow us to actually reduce our exports, and it will continue to move aggregate demand to the left. Okay, question 29. Which government action is most likely to cause the equilibrium position to move from X to Y, right? So first of all, we need to identify that to get from X to Y, we need to have a policy which will move AD to the right and will also move AS to the right. Okay? So if we look at these, an increase in the exchange rate that makes locally produced goods less price competitive both at home and abroad, so definitely not. Increase in exchange rate, just like we said with revaluation or appreciation, it would result in, generally it would result in aggregate demand moving to the left because we'd have an increase in imports. The only case that it wouldn't depends on the price elasticity of demand. Okay, so an increase in government spending on infrastructure that increases the productive potential, yeah? So increasing the productive potential, that's the part where AS is able to move to the right. So it's our potential economic growth, and the spending on the infrastructure would move aggregate demand to the right. So that's our policy that matches AD right, AS right. Now if we look at the others, increase in interest rates, we just explained, that's contractionary monetary policy. AD would go left, not right. And increases in real wages of labour, okay, so AD would move right because consumption would rise, but we wouldn't have an increase in quantity or quality of resources, so there would be no change in AS for the last one. Okay, technically this is not on the syllabus anymore, but we'll just answer it very quickly. So 28, an expenditure reducing policy, because we do have to know how we can fix current account balance of payments deficits. Expenditure reducing basically means what you think it would mean. a way of reducing the consumer expenditure, which would directly, hopefully, be addressed at reducing the level of imports, which would allow us therefore to reduce a deficit on the current account. So reducing interest rates would increase expenditure because it reduces the cost of borrowing, so consumption and investment generally rises. A revaluation of the currency, again, that results in imports being higher, which we've explained in question 29 and in question 30. Increase in indirect taxes would be the correct answer here. Contractionary fiscal policy, which is used to correct a current account deficit on the balance of payments. It will result in consumers having less disposable income in their pockets, which means that they should reduce their expenditure, possibly both domestically, but also in terms of the imports that they bring in from other countries. And foreign exchange controls are protectionism policies that can be used to control imports, but they're not specifically an expenditure reducing policy. They're like a restricting policy, I would say. Okay, 27. In 2000, Japan was Asia's largest exporter of electrical components. But by 2018, it was ranked 8th. What might explain this change? Okay, very simple. 28, 29, and 30 are all really focusing on the same thing. If the Japanese yen appreciates, what does it do? It reduces their exports, makes the price of their exports higher, which means that their total exports will go down as they become less price competitive in terms of other countries. Their imports, on the other hand, should rise as the prices of importing into Japan will fall with an appreciation of the currency. Okay, tariffs doesn't explain the effect on their exports. Deflation would actually help their exports because it would make it more price competitive in terms of other countries. And they have a lower opportunity cost in electrical component production than its Asian competitors. That wouldn't explain it. That would tell us that they have a comparative advantage. It wouldn't explain the reason why their exports have actually dropped off. (26) Diagram shows AD and AS for a country. Sum of the price elasticities of demand for imports and exports exceeds 1. Okay, so therefore we know we're going to follow what regularly happens with a depreciation or appreciation. Devaluation is the same as a depreciation. The only difference is that it's on a fixed exchange rate. It will reduce the price of imports, which once our PED is elastic, which we're told, will mean that our total export revenue will rise. It will increase the price of imports, which again will mean that our total import expenditure will fall, and therefore aggregate demand or net exports should shift to the right, and we will end at the correct point of B here. (25) Inflation rate in Argentina was over 100% in 2018. This is a very common question, and you just need to remember about inflation, your winners and losers, right? Because you can identify this straight away. Which combination correctly identifies the winners and losers? So just remember that if you hold your money in cash, if you hold your money in cash, you're definitely losing out with inflation, because the value of the cash that you're holding is being reduced on a daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly basis. Whereas individuals who have a high amount of debt at a fixed rate of interest, their fixed rate of interest, we'd assume anyway, would be lower than 100%. So they would actually be paying back less in real terms because the value of money is rising so much with the inflation. Workers on fixed wage contracts are definitely not a winner, so that one is out there. Firms selling goods abroad are definitely not a winner because the prices have doubled, which makes them extremely less competitive compared to other countries. And firms paying back loans on fixed monthly repayments, they would not be a loser, they would actually be a winner. Because again, same thing as individuals. They've got a fixed monthly repayment, they're paying back less in real terms than what the value of money is now because inflation has risen so rapidly. Okay, country operates a fixed exchange rate. So remember, if it's a fixed exchange rate, it is relating to the government holding foreign reserves. So the government essentially control the fixed exchange rate. The floating exchange rate is based on demand and supply. There's a major fall of international confidence in its government's economic policies. What would likely be the result? Okay, so first of all, remember, a fall in the foreign exchange rate would be the case if it was floating, right? Or it can only happen on a floating one, where demand and supply dictates the price. Terms of trade, nothing to do with the fixed exchange. Definitely won't rise capital inflows. There'll be less investment. So what will actually happen is it's something that we call capital flight. So essentially, if there's a major fall of international confidence in their policies, capital flight will happen. And that's where investors are essentially flying out of the economy. They're withdrawing their assets. And when they withdraw their assets, that will obviously have the effect of depleting the foreign reserves. Okay? And the government will then adjust their policies to maintain the exchange rate at the rate that they want to keep it at. Okay, assuming they have enough foreign reserves left to do so. Households' income increases by 3%, so plus 3 over the same rate. Period of inflation was also 3. Okay, so to get the real rate, remember inflation is always taken away, which means that the change in their nominal income would be 3%, which is the pay rise they got, but the change in their real income would be unchanged because inflation was also 3%. So very simply, you can see here that C would have to be your correct answer. Remember, nominal is the increase they get in monetary terms. Real is when we account for inflation, and inflation is always taken away. 22 is a very simple question. We've got Singapore's balance of payments for 2019. What was the value of the trade balance? Okay, so remember the balancing item, it always has to come to zero on the balance of payments. So we only look at the current account really in AS. The capital and the financial accounts are other accounts that form part of that balance of payments. Because it's a double entry accounting system, it always has to come to zero, which is why there might be a balancing item at the end of the period. But for the trade balance, it's very simply the trade of balance in goods minus the trade of balance in services. So if they're both positive figures, 134 and 8,000, then we just add those two up together, and that will give us 142,000 as a positive figure. Trade is goods and services. Okay, and remember the other components of the current account consist of the primary income and the secondary income, and we need to add all of those together too in order to get our current account balance. '21 be very simple. What is a correct description of an aggregate demand curve? So I won't spend too long on this because it's a definition, so you just have to go learn it. It's a curve that shows the total demand of all goods and services produced at all price levels in the economy. Question 20. What could explain an improvement in the terms of trade for a country? Again, very common question, comes up all the time. Remember, you need to know what the terms of trade is. So the terms of trade, it's the index of export prices divided by the index of import prices. Okay? So when we say an improvement, what we mean is that the price of exports rises. When we say a fall, right, or a deterioration is what they sometimes say in Cambridge exams, that would mean the price of exports is falling, right? Because it's done as like a balance. So 100, for example, it might be in year 1. For a favourable movement or an improvement, we'd be looking for a number that is bigger than 100 in the following year. And in order for that to happen, there would have to be an increase in the prices of the exports. It's nothing to do with our volume. Our terms of trade is to do with our index of the prices only. Okay, very important. The reason they keep giving this question in a lot of different years is because students keep getting it wrong. And it's so straightforward, you should not be getting it wrong. Question 19, also very simple. We've got horizontal axis and vertical axis. We've got an AD curve. So we know that price level goes here on the vertical and real GDP goes on the horizontal. Or at least we should know that, because that's about as basic a question as they can ask. So simple, we just go to C. Real GDP horizontal, vertical axis price level. Question 18. What is not a producer subsidy? Okay, grant given to cover losses in an essential industry. Well, a grant is a form of a subsidy, right? It's financial assistance. Guaranteed minimum price to ensure the long-run supply of food is also financial assistance. Then we're told in C that it is financial assistance, which we know that's what a subsidy is. So it has to be D. Payment made to the unemployed to allow them to buy essential goods and services. Yeah, it's not a producer subsidy, it's not given to the firm, and it's not financial assistance, it's given to the consumers. So it's probably some sort of form of transfer payment. Question 17. A government imposes a maximum price on medical face masks below the market equilibrium. What is the most likely effect of this? Okay, so just remember maximum price. If I just draw it very quickly here, I'm not going to fill it in completely. They told us that it's being put below equilibrium, which is good. That means we know that it is going to be effective. What will it do? It will result in a contraction in supply and an extension in demand. So once we know that, market will clear, definitely not. It creates a shortage down here. I'll just label that in here. Poor consumers will be able to obtain all the masks they need at the maximum price. Definitely not. Again, we can see that from the diagram. There is an extension in demand, which means that there is more being demanded than is being supplied. And the shortage tells us that they won't be able to obtain all the face masks that they want. Firms will produce more masks to meet the excess demand. Again, no. Firms will be disincentivized from creating the masks because of the fact that the price has dropped. That's the reason why supply will contract. And some consumers will be unable to buy face masks at the maximum price. That is correct. And again, we can see that from interpreting the diagram. 16. What type of tax used in different countries is a direct tax? Okay, remember direct taxes are mainly three. They're mainly income taxes, corporation taxes, or wealth taxes. Okay, so the direct tax here very simply would be corporation tax in India that is imposed on the profits of companies. Import duties, stamp duty, and specific tax, they're all forms of indirect taxes. They are taxes on goods or services, whereas a direct tax is not. Table shows 4 categories of government expenditure over 2 time periods. By how much had transfer payments changed between periods 1 and 2? Okay, so building of new roads is not transfer payments, it's expenditure on infrastructure. Payment of armed forces is current government expenditure. It's payment on making sure that the goods and services they provide can keep running. Transfer payments are non-exhaustive forms of government spending, and they include welfare payments and state pensions. 1700 we can see here in the first period, and then in the second period 450 plus 13450 should give us 800. So the increase in expenditure on transfer payments was plus 100. Okay, diagram shows the effect on the market for rice of a change in government policy. So we can see supply is shifted right, so that tells us that the government policy is a subsidy. Okay, especially the way they've drawn the diagram here. What does the area JKLM represent? So represents the cost of the subsidy to rice growers. None of the others apply, and I don't think I need to explain it really, because we should know these diagrams as well as the indirect tax diagrams. The only other element you need is to split it up between the benefit for the consumer and the benefit for the producer. So remember, the total cost of the subsidy applies to both of those benefits. The benefit for the consumer would be in here, which would be the area between the price they used to pay and the price that's left over. And the benefit for the producer would be the area that is left. Right? But remember that both of those areas together, so both of these here, would represent the total value of the subsidy. Okay? Because the subsidy is split into a benefit the consumer receives in the form of a lower price, and the benefit that the producer receives in the form of being able to absorb it into their cost of production and therefore basically keep more profit. This is 13 is a linear demand curve question. They come up all the time too. So you've got to remember, if I just label it here, W and X, they would both be elastic points. Y and Z would be inelastic. Remember, the linear demand curve theory is based on how the quantity changes. So at this point here where it says demand, it would be unitary, right? Now as we move further left, the quantity that we have here becomes less and less. So therefore any change in price we have at, for example, point X and point Y, any change in price that we have at point Y would represent a greater percentage change because the number we would be using for the quantity would be smaller in here. So that would make W more elastic than X. And the same thing applies here. So the further to the right you go, the more inelastic it becomes, further down to the right. Further to the left you go, the more elastic it becomes, because the quantity or the number that we're using becomes smaller, so therefore the percentage change will become larger. So to move from a price inelastic point to a less price inelastic point would have to be Z to Y. This would be the most price inelastic. Less price inelastic means we're getting closer to elastic, so we'd have to move in this direction here to the left. Okay, another definition question, which should be very straightforward. What does the assumption ceteris paribus mean when economists analyze the way in which the quantity demanded of a good changes? Ceteris paribus means that only one variable is assumed to change while all the others remain the same. Generally, it is drawn to show a change in price, and we assume that all of the other factors that will affect demand will remain constant. Consumer surplus, very simple again. That is also just a definition question. It is the amount by which consumers are willing to pay exceeds the market price. Okay, good X, Y, and Z all have downward sloping demand curves and upward sloping supply curves. Good X is in joint supply with good Y and in joint demand with good Z. Okay, there's an increase in the demand for good X. So first of all, we know that good X is in joint supply with good Y, right? So for X, we're going to have an increase in demand. Now, what that will do is that will cause an extension in supply, right? And because good X is in joint supply with good Y, what that's going to do for good Y is it's going to actually shift good Y's supply curve. So for good Y, the price we can see here is going to fall, and the quantity we can see is going to move to the right. So their sales will rise and the price will fall. And straight away that tells us the answer then, if we can identify that. But we also know that it's in joint demand with good Z. So therefore, if there's an increase in demand for good X, there's also going to be an increase in demand for good Z. So therefore, for good Z, there would have the same effect as we have here for good X. There'd be an increase in demand. Demand would shift right, sales would go up because quantity would move right and the price level would rise. Okay, question 9. What is necessary to achieve the best allocation of resources using the price mechanism? Producers can maximize their collective interest. That has nothing to do with achieving the best allocation of resources. Government must be able to apply minimum maximum pricing. No, because we're asked about achieving the best allocation of resources using price mechanism, so there will be no government involvement. And the PED value also has absolutely no effect on the allocation of resources. But in order to achieve the best allocation of resources, we need consumers and producers to have perfect knowledge. We need no information failure to exist. Now, as we've described before, we know that information failure does exist, and that is when the government should or must step in to address those information failure concerns. Okay, the demand for tablets increases while the cost of producing them decreases. So what's that? That's going to be a shift in demand right, cost of production down, shift in supply right. So what would be the effect on the price of tablets and on the quantity supplied? Okay, so if you're unsure and you can't do this in your head, some can, some can't, just draw the diagram every time to make sure, right? Demand moves right, supply moves right. What are we absolutely guaranteed? We are guaranteed that the quantity will increase, because both shifts in the right will increase the quantity. Price, however, depending on which one shifts more, could either go up or could go down, right? So the price is uncertain. The quantity we can see will definitely increase. Okay, what would cause the supply curve of sugar sweetened drinks to shift to the right? An increase of specific tax, supply curve would shift left. Increase in consumer income, demand curve would shift right. Removal of subsidy, supply curve would shift left. So none of those apply. So we're left with a fall in the price of sugar, and this might catch a few people out. When I was just glancing at the paper beforehand, even for myself, I was like, wait, what? That can't be the only option that's left. And then I just read the question again. So remember that it's sugar sweetened drinks. So if there's a fall in the price of sugar, that is a fall in the cost of production for sugar sweetened drinks, and therefore that would make the supply curve shift to the right as the cost of production falls, and we're able to make more cheaper than we were before. Okay, 6 was quite a difficult question, as well as the first couple of questions in this paper I think are relatively difficult. Overall, I think the paper is standard. After about question 15, I actually think those questions are very easy, but the first couple definitely require a bit of abstract thinking. So, supply of a new drug to relieve muscle pain is very inelastic over a short period of time. Supply of printed newspapers is much more elastic over the same time period. What could explain the difference in elasticity of supply of the drug and printed newspapers in this time period? Okay, so first of all, for the new drug, we're explaining why it is inelastic for PES, and for printed newspapers, we're explaining why it is elastic for PES. Okay, so what we would have, therefore, if the cost per unit is low, that would mean or would make it elastic, right? So that can't be correct. And cost per unit per high would make it inelastic for printed newspapers. The discovery is by chance for the new drug. That wouldn't really have an effect on whether it's inelastic or elastic, right? Because it's more to do with the determinants of PES. So what is the time taken to produce it? What is the ability to be able to store? All of those determinants of PES. So therefore, that doesn't really allow us to make a determination that it's inelastic. For D, the similar products available, that affects PED mainly, if you remember about the availability of substitutes. Whereas if research and development is essential, what does that do? That makes or means that it will take a long time to produce. Right? Because research and development will have to be ongoing before we can actually produce the product on a large scale. Right? So short run, the time taken up by research and development will make it inelastic. If there's excess capacity in printing, then the printed newspapers can become elastic because they will be able to have spare capacity and they will be able to increase their supply levels very quickly over a short period of time. They don't have to wait on obtaining capital equipment to be able to increase their supply levels. Okay, question 5. Diagram relates to the markets for 4 different products. A 10% decrease in demand and a 10% increase in supply would definitely result in a fall in equilibrium price and a rise in equilibrium quantity. So let's see, demand would have to go left, supply would have to go right, and we're told that the price has to go down, and the quantity has to go up. Okay, so this is quite a unique question. You kind of just need to look at each of the diagrams. If you have a 10% decrease in demand and a 10% increase in supply here, what you're going to have is you're going to have the price go down and you're going to have the quantity remain the exact same, because demand and supply would shift at the same rate. Now I know that my diagram doesn't necessarily show that, but you guys should know by now that if the change in demand and the change in supply is the exact same, and if they both look to have the same elasticity as they do here, then a 10% change in both would result in quantity remaining unchanged and price level dropping. So can't be B. Here therefore, for D, for C and for A, what we're left with is we need to take a look at the effect of a change in price or a change in demand and supply on each of these. So if we're told for C here, for example, that straight away we recognize that if we have a change in demand would shift left, right? Quantity, no matter what happens from that point, because demand and supply intersecting will result in quantity will have to go down, right? Quantity cannot rise, and we're told that we need the quantity to rise and the price to drop. So C can be ruled out. Same thing for D. If we have a change here, because it's perfectly elastic for supply, even if we have a shift here or a shift here for supply, no matter what happens, once demand shifts to the left, there would have to be a decrease in the quantity. So even if we draw a new supply, just for example, we'll draw a supply curve up here and we'll draw a new supply curve down here, right? Increase in supply, quantity would drop every time, right? Whereas the only one where it wouldn't would be where the supply curve is shifting to the right, which would be A. So we'd have our change in supply here. We'd have a fall in demand here, so demand would shift left. And then what would we have? From our original point, which was here, we would have a drop in the price level, and we would have an increase in the quantity. Okay, so this one is just very simply, they're getting you to understand your theory on shifts. Supply shifts right in every case here, demand shifts left in every case. If you understand the direction of each one, you should be able to understand the circumstances in which the price will drop and the quantity will rise. Okay, so that one has to be A. Okay, which term assumes the existence of qualities, knowledge and skills? So again, we won't spend too long on this. It's simple definition. That is human capital. That assumes the existence of quality, knowledge and skills. Enterprise investment, they're trying to throw that in for you there. Remember, that's just investment into entrepreneurs or into enterprise. Mechanization and specialization. So mechanization is moving to using more capital equipment. Specialization is deciding to focus on making one good or one product or providing one service. None of them are to do with the definition for qualities, knowledge and skills. Just like opportunity cost measures the benefits given up by not consuming the next best alternative, which is important when you're learning the definition of opportunity cost. Again, just a simple definition question. Okay. Question 2 is kind of unique because they're giving you a fiscal policy question basically at the very start, which will not happen now that the syllabus has changed. all these questions will be directed towards the macro side, which will be after question 15, probably around question 20 to 25 on the new papers. So, positive economic statement, we're asked to remember a positive economic statement is a statement which is factual and can be tested. Okay? Direct tax is unfair on rich households in the UK. That is not a positive statement, that is a normative statement. Direct tax in the UK is a proportional tax. No, it is not. We can see from the table that it's not, because if you calculate the percentages here, 2,000 divided into 15.3 will not be the same percentage as 21,200 into 90,600 or 9,500 into 47,600. Okay? Poor households do not pay enough direct tax. Again, that is a normative statement. It is an opinion. It is not factual and it cannot be tested. But rich households pay more direct tax than in the UK, than poor households. That is factual, it can be tested, and we can see it as true. Here, the level of direct tax they pay in the top 20% of households is £21,200, and in the bottom 20% of households, it is merely £2,000. So they do pay more direct tax than the poor households will pay. Okay, question 1, like we said, no longer relevant with syllabus. So that's it for this paper.